Hi, my name is Sean Holmes. Welcome to If I Had the Power to Time Travel, remake the MCU, how would I remake it? Today's subject for this Phase 2 project that I've been working on for quite some time is titled Spectacular Spider-Man, Parker's Origins. So this is my proposal for how I would remake, or how would I make a Spider-Man movie for my Phase 2. Before we begin, I'd like to go back to the last entry I worked on, which I made a lot of mistakes. It was titled Iron Man 2. I'm not going to cover all the mistakes I made, but I want to cover one specific one I think was very important to try and correct here. And then we'll move on to the other thing that I want to discuss. Okay, so the thing I want to correct here regarding Iron Man 2 is the word I kept bringing up all the time that was incorrect, and that's skin. It was an acronym for what I thought was his device for managing paralysis, but it wasn't. In the Marvel Comics, skin is just a suit of armor that Tony Stark creates. What managed Tony Stark's paralysis when he was paralyzed in Marvel Comics was a white back brace. Say again, it was a white back brace and an implant that was surgically implanted in Tony Stark's lower back area. In the comic books, in that story of his paralysis, or involving his paralysis, a man by the name of Kirsten DeWitt remote controlling takes over that device. You see, the device was created by a company called Cordco, and Kirsten controlled that company. He also had a dislike for Tony Stark, so he took control of that device and tried to beat him in an Armor Wars fight, an armor battle, to which Tony Stark won as Iron Man. Anyway, that's the story of the white back brace, the implant, and how Tony Stark overcame his paralysis until he cured it. Now let's move back to, or onto what I came here to discuss, which is Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, subtitled Parker's Origins. Let's start off with the first section I want to cover, which I title Deep Cover. The first section of this Spider-Man movie proposal is about Richard Parker. Richard Parker is the father of Peter Parker, which is not often covered in Marvel Comics, but it has been mentioned. He's someone I think should be the focus, not the main focus, but kind of a figure in the background that kind of leads the main character to his destiny. Okay, so in my proposal story, Richard Parker is a SHIELD agent, an undercover SHIELD agent, codenamed Spider. His current mission for the purposes of this movie proposal is to work as a scientist in a Russian biotech company that's doing research and experiments. His mission there is to extract information, and defectors wishing to leave Russia to gain citizenship in America, people of high value, in this case scientists. At one point, Parker stumbles onto such a scientist worthy of extraction, and he tries to bring this person to America, but he fails at doing so. The scientist gets shot, but not before the scientist hands off some important thumb drives on the experiment he was working on with Richard Parker's help. So, to recap, Richard Parker is a SHIELD agent with undercover and combat skills, but he's also a scientist. Anyway, Richard Parker receives 2 thumb drives from the dead man he failed to rescue, and he takes that thumb drive while dodging and weaving past security to a courier that would safely take the thumb drives out of Russia and put it into the hands of the right people. Now, all this cloak and dagger stuff that Richard Parker is doing, he's doing under his spider uniform that he designed while working for S.H.I.E.L.D., equipped with web shooters and a whole bunch of other gimmicks that are oftentimes attributed to Spider-Man or Spider-Man-like characters in the Marvel Comics, as well as S.H.I.E.L.D. So, Richard Parker hands off thumb drives to a courier along with his spider uniform. I think it should be depicted as black uniform and mask, so he could walk freely as a normal person through the unsuspected people of Russia, including the security. Unsuspected civilians of Russia, including the security. Okay, so now we move on to the second scene I title The Betrayal on the Jet. Gets to a private jet so he can leave Russia safely to avoid being captured by the Russian security. Because prior to his exit from leaving the Russian biotech lab he was working at, let me say again, the biotech Russian lab he was working at, he set the place ablaze. He set it on fire. So Richard Parker boards this plane, which has his wife, Mary Parker, on it, and his buddy and S.H.I.E.L.D. liaison, Miles Warren. So Richard Parker's S.H.I.E.L.D. handler is Miles Warren. Sometime on that plane trip, Miles Warren asks him for thumb drives he acquired from the Russian biotech facility. Richard Parker hands him useless thumb drives that have no, or doesn't have a whole lot of valuable information on it. And after he does that, Miles Warren shoots him. He then parachutes out of the plane he was on with Richard Parker, and he detonates it while it's in the air, causing it to explode. Before that plane explodes, while Richard Parker's on the plane floor dying of a bullet wound, he swallows a microdot, which has some of his secrets on it, his personal secrets, including a secret base he sometimes operates out of in America that belongs to him. Richard Parker's body is never recovered. Now we move on to scene 3, I title Uncle Ben's Burden. In this scene, Ben receives a safety deposit key in the mailbox, with a note. This box contains Richard's wedding ring and some files. Ben burns Richard's old files, but keeps the thumb drives he receives from the same box, which had his wedding ring in it. He then turns to May and tells her, the less we know, the safer it is for Peter Parker, who he's raising, and is, of course, the son of Richard Parker. Years pass. Peter grows up with a curious mentality because he sees Ben picking locks on Richard's old trunk. Now, what's important to know about Ben is that he's not your average citizen. Ben has routines that he normally does all the time. He referred to as drop dead routines. These routines consist of checking a loose brick on a park bench to constantly being on guard for people. He's always watching people to see who he doesn't recognize wherever he goes, because he's always nervous about his family's safety. So, so now we move on to scene 4, the spider bites. Peter Parker finds Richard's trailer using coordinates hidden in the wedding ring of his dead mother. So, at some point in time, Peter took interest in the wedding ring that was recovered by Ben, and Peter finds coordinates within the wedding ring. So it takes him to a place which has a false wall. He finds a retinal scanner in this place that seems kind of run down, old. This retinal scanner scans Peter's eyes, which is something Richard planned for to happen. And Peter eventually stumbles onto Richard Parker's secret lab in America. While doing so, he's bit by this spider. He meets an AI system that Richard developed called Aura. Aura recognizes him right away as Peter Parker, the son of Richard Parker, and welcomes him to the lab. Aura tells Peter that his father was a government secret scientist plus field agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. And he shows him his training room. Peter tries to have a little fun, since he's a teenager, with that training room to see if he can be like his father. But he fails the training room test to be a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. That's an important note because we're going to come back to that later. Also, it's important to know that the lab has a dead man's trigger. I don't mean to scare anybody with that part, but basically if Richard doesn't log in weekly or it goes dormant, which is why it awoke when Peter came in the room, because it was programmed to respond to Peter Parker by Richard. So now we move on to scene 5. I title Uncle Ben's Death. Ben leaves the lab and he goes back to his own home. And Ben surprisingly takes Peter to Miles Warren's proposed science fair. Not a coincidence, a science fair. It's not a random thing. And Ben is going to science fair with Peter to follow leads that he's uncovered regarding Richard's death. Ben confronts Warren privately while Peter is somewhere else at the fair, science fair, observing lots of events there. There's an argument between Ben and Miles Warren, and Warren realizes that Ben has the drives he's looking for because the drives that he received from Richard were useless. So as Ben leaves angry because he didn't really get what he wanted from Miles Warren, and he takes Peter with him, Miles nods at a villain named Chameleon to follow Ben. Chameleon is kind of posing as a security guard, living kind of covertly because he's done a lot of bad things in his past. We'll get to some of what those bad things are in a little while. On the way home, as Ben is taking his nephew Peter, Ben is killed. at some moment where Peter was separated from Ben. While Ben is dying in Peter's arms, Ben's final words are, "Find Aurora, she knows who I am." Peter has already found Aurora, but Peter has not really asked Aurora the important questions about his family, his father, his Uncle Ben. So, the reason why that's important, because in my story, Ben Parker was no ordinary citizen. He too was a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, analyst. He left after Richard's death, and he kind of, well, Peter really knowing it, taught Peter certain things like lock picking and situational awareness without ever saying why, or making it seem like he was giving him special military skills for survival. Because he wanted Peter to think he had a safe, normal life.